the one, the only, Richard Dawkins. Richard, welcome back to my office.
Thank you very much.
This is like your fourth time here or something. I've lost count.
Something like
something
that.
Something like that.
Always a pleasure, Neil.
Oh, welcome. I mean, we have a lot of catching up to do, I think. So recently, or at least this year, we lost Daniel Dennett, philosopher Daniel Dennett. I recently learned, I didn't read all of his books, I read some of them. He declared that Darwin's evolution by natural selection was the greatest idea anybody ever had. He's coming to it not as a biologist, but as a philosopher. So how do you reflect on that declaration?
He said that at the beginning of his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And his point was that before Darwin came along, it seemed obvious to everyone that big, complicated things like humans and oak trees and things had to have an explanation in terms of design. And it was a huge stroke of insight for Darwin to see that it didn't, that the laws of physics alone could produce this prodigious amount of complexity filtered through this odd process of natural selection. To me, it's always been strange that it took so long, that it took until the middle of the 19th century for Darwin and Wallace, and even maybe one or two other people.
This is thousands of years of thought.
Yes,
and brilliant people have come before.
Aristotle could have had it and didn't. I mean, when you think how much cleverer you had to be to do what Newton did, or Leibniz, inventing calculus, working out about the laws of how gravity.
The Newton finger puppet here.
Okay, yeah. You'd think that somebody would have tumbled to evolution by natural selection before the middle of the 19th century, yet they didn't. And so that's an astonishing thing, and it needs an explanation.
Did Daniel Dennett explain why it took that long? And if he didn't, what would be your explanation?
I don't remember whether he did. Well, first of all, Ernst Mayr, the great, he was here, I think.
Here at the American Museum of Natural History.
He thought it was because of essentialism. He thought that because of Aristotle and Plato, who thought that just because they thought like geometers, I mean, a right-angled triangle is a kind of perfect form sort of hanging out there. And they thought that the perfect rabbit, the perfect rhinoceros was hanging out there just like a right-angled triangle. So you couldn't imagine how a rabbit could turn into anything different. That was his explanation. That wouldn't be mine. I mean, I think it's just that...
That's an interesting one, though, because it speaks to the bias that we have observing nature. I mean, even in my field. So my people, including Copernicus, could not shake the idea of orbits that were perfect circles. They couldn't shake that. Why would God design a universe with a shape that wasn't geometrically perfect? So even Copernicus, putting the sun back in the middle of the known universe, had circular orbits. And since the orbits are not circles, they actually differed from predictions on the night sky. So that was a problem at the time. It's like Copernicus, this might work, but it still doesn't fit. The epicycles are doing much better. And so it wasn't instantly taken up, including the resistance, the church resistance, of course.
Of course, yes.
Earth wasn't in the middle anymore. Our counterpart to what I think you're describing is the urge to try to presume nature was perfect and then account for it with everything we know that is.
Going back to why it took so long and the idea of the perfect rabbit, the perfect rhinoceros, the perfect horse, in a way that was a bit silly because if you want to look at, I mean, a population of rabbits is pretty variable. And anyway, that was Ernst Mayr's explanation for why it took so long. Darwin did it by going via artificial selection. Everybody knew, farmers knew, horticulturalists knew, gardeners knew that you could change a rose, you could change a cabbage by just breeding. And really Darwin's insight was to say you don't actually need a breeder. You don't need a human to do the breeding. Nature does it for you. Survival does it for you. It's not that difficult. I mean, it doesn't require any sort of higher mathematics or anything. And yet nobody got it until Darwin and Wallace.
And this is why I'm intrigued that Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who, in principle, any philosopher could have come up with this, because unlike relativity and unlike quantum physics, which are realms of behavior of the universe large and small that you can't just deduce from your armchair. But evolution by natural selection could have been deduced in an armchair.
Yeah,
it just wasn't.
It could. It's surprising that it didn't. It's interesting that both Darwin and Wallace were traveling naturalists, and they both were collectors in South America. Both were in South America. Wallace lost his entire South American collection in a fire. And then he went to the Far East. But they were both collectors of natural history specimens. And the other person who might have thought of it is Patrick Matthew, who was a gardener and an orchard keeper. But philosophers...
The conversation opens with a tribute to the late philosopher Daniel Dennett, who famously called Darwinian evolution the greatest idea anybody ever had. Think about that claim. Not the wheel, not fire, not the printing press. Evolution. Why? Because before Darwin, the complexity of life was the ultimate trump card for religion. You could explain lightning with electricity, you could explain the tides with gravity, but you couldn't explain a human eye or a hummingbird's wing without saying a designer made this. Darwin took the last hiding place of God, biological complexity, and showed that it was actually the result of simple, blind, physical laws. But Dawkins raises a fascinating question here. Why did it take so long? Newton figured out gravity in the 1600s. Calculus was invented. We had incredible mathematics. Yet humanity waited until the mid-19th century to figure out that life evolves. As Dawkins points out, any philosopher in an armchair could have deduced it. It doesn't require a particle accelerator. It just requires logic. The answer, Dawkins suggests, referencing Ernst Mayr, lies in the mental trap of essentialism inherited from Plato and Aristotle. This is the idea that for every object there is a perfect form existing somewhere in the abstract realm, a perfect rabbit, a perfect triangle. If you believe that reality consists of fixed, perfect types created by a god, then variation, a slightly faster rabbit, a slightly longer-necked giraffe, looks like a mistake. It looks like a deviation from the divine plan. But evolution requires you to see that variation is not a mistake. It is the engine. This is a profound insight for atheists. It shows how religious or magical thinking literally blocks scientific discovery. For 2,000 years, the smartest people on Earth couldn't see the obvious mechanism of life because they were wearing the blinders of divine perfection. They were looking for a static creation in a dynamic world. It reminds us that dogma doesn't just make you wrong, it makes you blind.
That was the year I graduated high school.
Okay.
No, I remember because it was like the bicentennial year. Everybody made a big deal of this. It was my first presidential election that I could vote in. And I voted for Jimmy Carter. And I got to tell him this so cliched line. But when I met him, I said, "You were my first president that I voted for." And it was 1 month after my birthday, I got to vote for him. So I thought I'd have a short exercise here. I'm going to mention your books. Could you just tell me what your favorite bit of that book was that you were communicating with the reader, if I may? So start off, The Selfish Gene.
Natural selection chooses between genes. Genes are the only thing, the information contained in genes. Digital information is the only thing that goes from generation to generation. That which survives is information, digital information. Some genes survive better than others. We, the bodies, we, the animals, we, the plants, are just the machines that are there to preserve the genes that ride inside us.
Whoa, okay. So that reminds me of how I describe your gut bacteria. I say, people want to think they're like top of the world, and I say, all you are to those bacteria is a darkened vessel of anaerobic fecal matter.
That's right. And it's pretty much the same with your genes. I mean, it's not fecal matter, it's testicular matter or ovarian matter, but yes.
Okay, so they're the ones carrying themselves forward.
Yes.
So if it's just information.
We then move to the concept that made Dawkins famous, the selfish gene. Dawkins clarifies a point that is often misunderstood. When we talk about the selfish gene, we aren't saying genes have emotions or that they are morally bad. We are talking about information. Dawkins describes genes as digital information. This is crucial. Long before the computer age, nature invented digital coding. Your DNA is not a spirit, it is a software script. And what is the goal of this script? To copy itself. Tyson vividly and hilariously summarizes the biological reality. All you are to those bacteria is a darkened vessel of anaerobic fecal matter. Dawkins corrects him slightly. We are machines created by our genes to preserve them. We are survival machines. This sounds cold to some, but I find it liberating. It strips away the ego. We are not the center of the universe. We are temporary vessels for an ancient code that has survived for billions of years. This perspective shifts the focus from the soul to the data. A soul is a vague, undefinable religious concept. A genome is a tangible, readable library of information. Dawkins mentions he has his genome backed up. In a secular world, this is the closest we get to immortality, the preservation of the information that makes us unique.
Stan, you have to allow me my explanation for the chicken and the egg.
Okay.
Okay, so I tell people, but I've never gotten your blessings on this. Can I use that word with you?
Yeah, of course. I'm all for blessings.
So I simply tell people, they say, what came first, chicken or the egg? I said, the egg. It was just laid by a bird that was not a chicken.
Yes.
That's a fair statement.
Laid by a dinosaur.
I'm compressing
Yes.
a billion, 100 million years of time there.
Yes.
But at some point, you're going to say what comes out of the egg is a chicken, but that's a genetic alteration from the previous generation.
But there never was a moment when a bird that was not a chicken gave rise to a chicken. It never was.
Of course. So this is a very compressed,
yes.
It's a shorthand
Yes.
for what you just said with the
Yes.
book of your ancestors,
Yes.
going back to the fish.
Yes. I once had a letter from a lawyer who said, roughly speaking, evolution can't be true because a species is defined as members can always interbreed with each other. And you can't imagine that there was a time when child generation was incapable of breeding with the previous generation. Of course, you couldn't. But he thought that meant that somehow evolution was invalid. He couldn't grasp
That everything was specially created.
Yeah. Everything is, it's a gradual process all the way through. And as you step back through your ancestors, they become slightly less like a human, but you never notice it as you walk past them. If you imagine...
I want to see a fish. It's just funny. So you skip ahead and there's a fish. You say, that's my parent.
Yes.
Yes. It's a little freaky for people.
But
you gotta appreciate.
As you walk along the generations, you'd never see them getting more fish-like. It would just be so gradual, you would never notice it.
Because generations are only 30, 40 years,
Yes.
and we're talking billions.
Yes, that's right.
You needed deep time for evolution to do what it needed to do. Even in the 19th century, my people, the most we were going to give you as a biologist or even the geologist was 10 million years, 20 million at tops. We didn't know about energy contained inside the nucleus of the atom yet. Nuclear energy, which is how the sun makes fuel. We didn't know that at the time. So the best we could do was say it was a lump of coal.
Darwin's son Charles Darwin's son George.
Tyson brings up the age-old riddle, which came first, the chicken or the egg? For a creationist, this is a gotcha question. If God created animals as they are, did he make the chicken or the egg? But Tyson and Dawkins dismantle this effortlessly. The answer, the egg came first. Why? Because as Tyson puts it, it was laid by a bird that was not a chicken. This brings us back to the anti-essentialist argument. There was never a specific moment where a non-chicken gave birth to a chicken. Evolution is a gradient. It's like looking at a color spectrum. You can point to red and you can point to blue, but you cannot point to the exact millimeter where red becomes purple. Dawkins uses the analogy of holding hands with your ancestors. If you hold your mother's hand and she holds her mother's hand and so on, forming a chain miles long, eventually you're holding hands with a fish. But at no single point in that chain would a parent look at their child and say, "You are a different species." This concept of deep time is the enemy of religious fundamentalism. Fundamentalism relies on distinct categories: man versus beast, good versus evil, creator versus creation. Evolution smears those lines. It shows us that we are all part of a continuous, flowing river of life. We are not separate from nature. We are a momentary shape taken by it.
So that's a selfish gene. So let's move ahead here. The Blind Watchmaker. Oh, that's my favorite book of yours, if I may.
Okay. Well, The Watchmaker comes from William Paley, the theologian, who said that there must be a God because if you find a watch, you pick up the watch. He was crossing a heath, he said. And you open it up. There's a great big pocket watch in those days.
Back when watches were watches.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And you see all the cogwheels and springs and things. It had to have a designer, of course it did. And so how much more would you say that of an eye or a knee joint or anything living? So that's the Paley watchmaker argument. Natural selection is the blind watchmaker. It produces results that are like watches. They're beautifully designed. Eyes are beautifully designed, certain flaws, but they are beautifully designed. And they come about not through any design process, not through any deliberate design, but through the blind watchmaker, which is natural selection. So
that's hard for people to accept, especially if they're deeply religious.
Yes.
Because they already have an account.
Yes.
Now you're saying one of the acts of their God is some random force operating.
He didn't have to be there at all.
He didn't have to be there at all.
Yes.
And I think where people get confused, and even some of our people have made this mistake, Fred Hoyle, who was the architect of the steady state universe, who pejoratively invented the name Big Bang to describe the universe beginning in one point. He said that in a pejorative way. He wanted the universe to be a steady state. He did a calculation for how you would get an eye, a fully functioning eye, and how long that would take. And it was some impossibly, 10 to the some very high power number of years, given the rate at which you have defects in a genome. And correct me if I'm wrong, the rebuttal to that is natural selection is not completely random.
Well, no, that's right. It actually wasn't an eye. It was a hemoglobin molecule, but it's the same argument anyway. So what he overlooked was that it doesn't happen all in one go. He imagined all the bits coming together at random.
And that's one case that doesn't work, and it has another random thing that doesn't work.
Yes.
And you do that forever.
You do that forever. Of course you want, but what you need is, let's use the eye, even though he didn't. You need a slightly less good eye, and then a slightly less good eye, and a slightly less good eye. And if you start with just a sheet of light-sensitive cells, which just detect whether it's light or dark, that's useful. It's not like
it's better than not having it.
It's better than not having it. You can tell when it's night or day. You can tell whether there's a predator flying overhead. And then if you have a slightly cup-shaped, if you bend that retina from a flat thing into a slight cup, then if it's coming from that direction, it hits that side of the. We are on video, aren't we? Yes. And so you get, it's not an image, but it gives a slight directionality. And then you close up and you start to get a pinhole camera. It's a very crude, it's out of focus, but it's sort of an image. And then you need a little bit of transparent gunk in there. It's not a proper lens, but it does something like a lens. And all these stages, one by one, they step by step, they incrementally improve.
And every improvement is the new starting place for the variations at that generation.
That's right, and then you get improvement.
Because every generation is not starting from zero.
That's right, yes.
So The Blind Watchmaker, I just thought that was brilliantly written, and it was my benchmark for if I were to ever write a book for the public, I want to be this articulate.
Oh, wow, that's high praise, Neil.
I just want you to know. I just want you to know that.
Thank you for that.
Okay, let the record show. Climbing Mount Improbable.
Well, that's what we've just been talking about.
Yes.
Mount Improbable is
just that metaphor. Describe it to me.
It's a metaphor where you've got a mountain You've got a sheer cliff, a vertical cliff, and on the top of the cliff is an eye. And to produce the eye in the Fred Hoyle manner would be to leap from the bottom of the cliff to the top in one go.
In one go.
You cannot do it. But you go around the other side of the mountain, and you find a nice gentle slope. And so you just climb step by step, and you reach the summit.
Now we arrive at the heavy artillery. The argument from design is the oldest trick in the theological book. William Paley famously argued that if you found a watch on a heath, you would assume a watchmaker. Therefore, if you find an eye, you must assume an eye maker, God. Dawkins calls this the argument from personal incredulity. It basically means, I am too stupid to understand how this happened naturally, therefore it must be magic. Tyson and Dawkins discuss the evolution of the eye, a favorite target for creationists. How do you get half an eye? Isn't half an eye useless? Dawkins explains the climbing Mount Improbable concept. Light-sensitive cells. You start with a patch of skin that can tell light from dark. That is useful, detecting a shadow of a predator. Cup shape. Now the cup curves slightly. Now you can tell the direction of the light. That is more useful. Pinhole camera. The cup closes almost shut. Now you have a crude image. Lens. Transparent fluid fills the hole. Now the image is sharper. At every single step, the organism has a survival advantage over the one before it. There is no miracle moment. It is just incremental improvement over millions of years. Tyson adds a fantastic point about the blind watchmaker. If there's a designer, he is not just blind, he is messy. The human eye has a blind spot where the optic nerve passes through the retina. A camera doesn't have that. If God designed the eye, he did a worse job than Sony or Canon. Natural selection explains the flaws. Intelligent design cannot explain the flaws without making God look incompetent.
And this one, much was written about unweaving the rainbow. So tell me about that.
Okay.
That was, we're up to 1998 now.
That comes from Keats.
I did not know that.
Keats complained about Newton spoiling all the poetry of the rainbow by explaining it. And so my point was the point which you've made often enough, that actually there's far more poetry in really understanding the spectrum.
So did I tell you this? Do you remember there was this, it was on YouTube, it was what's called Double Rainbow Guy. Have you ever seen this?
No.
Double Rainbow. You should check it out.
Okay.
Okay, this is now, back when social media was just people posting things. It wasn't the cesspool that it is today.
Yes.
So he was hiking somewhere. There's some guy, back when you needed a camcorder to take videos,
yes,
not a cell phone. He's hiking in, was it Sierra Madres? I don't remember where. And you hear him sort of narrating his, oh, that's a nice cliff. Then he turns a corner and he says, oh, a rainbow. Oh my gosh, what could it mean? Oh, a double rainbow. Oh my gosh. And he's tearing. You don't see him, but you can easily interpret just his emotions and his breath. And then he goes prostrate to the ground.
Yes.
And he can't contain himself. What does it mean? This is a sign. And so I felt bad doing this. You might be proud of me, but I felt bad doing this. I tweeted, I put a link to this video, and I said, this is how you behave if you've never studied physics.
Yes.
But I thought that was kind of mean. He's having his moment.
Well, in a way, that's what Keats was doing. And that's
to
what
Newton.
Yes, that's right. But anyway, I can cap your story in the opposite direction. I read a story about a woman in California. She had a lawn sprinkler, and she saw a rainbow in the lawn sprinkler, and she said, what are they doing to our water supply?
That's funny. Oh my gosh. So I did not know that Keats had that to say about Newton, because Newton, he decoded the rainbow.
Yes.
That was his thing. It's what he did.
One of his things.
Oh, by the way, you mentioned how beautiful the eye is, even with some flaws. As an astrophysicist, when I would learn this very early, when I took classes here, actually, when I was in middle school at the Hayden Planetarium, that's when I learned about the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and that the visible part of the spectrum is tiny.
Yes.
It's not even a full octave
that's right.
of the of what's out
Yes.
there. And then I was just disappointed with my sight. I said, is this the best nature could
the
give?
X-rays?
Is this, you know, let me go back in line and see what else is there. And later on in Star Trek The Next Generation, there'd be a character called Geordi. He had a visor, VISOR, which was an acronym, Visual Instrument Sight Organ Replacement. And so early acronym days. So yeah, I'd be intrigued by what the world would look like that way. For example, if someone's calling you on your cell phone, that would be like radiant microwaves while that's happening. That'd be just kind of cool, you know. Or if you go by the countryside and you see radio towers, they would be the brightest things on the horizon, and now they're just hunks of metal. And so they get him to look at scenes that they're coming upon. It's high in X-rays, it's high in this, it's high in that.
Yes.
And then I worried that if you could see all bands of light, that would be very visually noisy, wouldn't it?
Yes. I mean, if you see right through to radio waves, where you wouldn't, I mean...
Well, then everything becomes
long
transparent.
wavelengths, yes.
Then there are no walls in this office.
You wouldn't see things. That's right.
You have coined this term, and we've even appeared on stage together under this title, The Poetry of Reality. And I'm all in. But if you're actually a poet, surely there are parts of reality that are best expressed by a poet. Would you agree?
I suppose so. I've never quite understood. I mean, I don't write verse, but I suppose, like you, I try to evoke emotion at the same time as
Otherwise,
science.
it's just a wiki page.
Yes,
right.
that's
You
right.
want some...
And I'm not entirely clear what you mean by poetic. I sort of feel intuitively I know what it means, but I can't quite put it into words. Maybe that's no accident. Yes, I defend in my own mind the idea that science is the poetry of reality. It makes me feel poetic. And I think it makes you feel poetic.
So it might be self-serving on that level. What would matter if others can be convinced of the same? Because otherwise it's just a self-licking ice cream cone.
That's right. And if you're skilled in writing, I think you can bring out others with you.
For me, poetry, art more broadly, best serves us when it highlights something you might have otherwise missed or never noticed.
It's a good way to put it.
My best example of that was July 21st, 22nd, was it? After we landed on the moon in 1969, the New York Times had a special section, people reacting to the fact that we walked on the moon. And there were all these famous poets of the day. There was Archibald MacLeish and, you know, people who carried the soul of creative expression in the day. And I read these poems. They were awful. We've pierced the sky and touched the sky. And I'm thinking, none of this is greater than the act of walking on the moon itself. So maybe I don't need artists to interpret that for me. Maybe I need them to interpret the tree that I'm walking by. And then you get Joyce Kilmer's poem, The Tree. I will never see something as lovely as a tree. Arms pressed to the sky. There's in American poetry, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That might not be heralded as great poetry, but we all know it here in America. And that's a poem about a guy who told other people that the enemy was coming? Is that an important person? No. Yet we all know that person's name because it's a poem about him. You do not know that corresponding person for any other war that has ever been fought in the history of the world. The person who told other people that the enemy was coming, that is not a person. But for us it is because it was a poem about him. It was somebody who would otherwise go forgotten. So for me, art is best when it captures that. I don't need artists saying, oh, I saw this Hubble photo. Here's my painting of that Hubble photo. I don't need that because I got the Hubble photo. Give me a point of view that science does not give me. Then we can hang out together in the sandbox. That's how I feel about it.
The tree poem you mentioned, that's a religious poem. I mean,
well,
only God can make a tree.
At the end, but no, come on, God. The God was just in the culture. So
okay.
Is it religious when you say goodbye, when that draws from God be with you? It's just a cultural expression.
Think of Carl Sagan's chapter headings. They inspire me. Just every single one of his chapter headings.
Yes. His widow,
Yes.
Andrian, who is highly literate unto herself and co-author
Yes.
of all three cosmoses, even the two that I
Yes,
had
I
the
know.
privilege of
Yes.
hosting. She was a major force in that poetic voice. I just want to
Okay.
One of the most common accusations against atheists is that we take the magic out of the world. The poet John Keats accused Isaac Newton of unweaving the rainbow by explaining how light works. He felt that knowing it was a prism destroyed the beauty. Dawkins and Tyson passionately reject this. This is the core of secular humanist spirituality, if we can use that word. Tyson argues that understanding the electromagnetic spectrum doesn't diminish the rainbow, it expands it. When you know that the visible rainbow is just a tiny sliver of reality, and that there are rainbows in X-rays, infrared, and ultraviolet, the world becomes more beautiful, not less. They discuss the double rainbow guy, the viral video of a man crying over a double rainbow. Tyson jokes that this is how you behave if you don't know physics, but there's a deeper point here. The religious or mystical reaction is often one of overwhelmed confusion. What does it mean? It's a sign. The scientific reaction is one of awed understanding. I know how this is happening, and the fact that the laws of physics conspire to create this beauty is profound. We don't need myths to feel awe. The reality is awesome enough. We don't need to pretend the rainbow is a bridge to Valhalla or a promise from Yahweh. It is the refraction of light through water droplets, a universal law that applies on Earth, on Mars, and on planets orbiting distant stars. That universality is the true poetry.
put you on a plateau to be identified as one of the four horsemen.
Oh, right. Yes.
Okay.
Not a phrase that any of us actually...
It was bestowed upon you?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens.
Sam Harris.
And both of them are passed. Sam Harris and you.
Yes.
Okay. The four horsemen who have each been quite vocal about their atheism.
Yes.
And the God delusion, if that's not atheist, I don't know what is.
It is, yes.
In the title.
Yes.
Right. So we spoke about this book before. Didn't you say there were religious groups that wanted people to read it so that they know the face of their enemy? Was that?
I forget. It's quite possible. There are some people who say they were converted to religion by it.
Really?
Yes. I'm not quite sure how they managed to get that, but it doesn't say much for my rhetorical skills.
So is this your single biggest selling book, The God Delusion?
Yes, just about, yes.
Yeah.
Or it's equal to The Selfish Gene, maybe.
I've taken you to task on the very first day I met you, and I think it's worth repeating here. The first day I ever knew you. Again, like I said, I'd read your books, and yeah, I aspired to have the vocabulary, the command of vocabulary that spills off your plate. I took you to task in the front of a group. It was one of the what's the name of that conference? A Beyond Belief conference.
Oh, yes.
Which gathered.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Which gathered scientists,
Yeah.
biologists, theologians,
Yes.
philosophers.
Yes.
And it was to discuss, are we in an era beyond where belief matters?
Yes.
Does belief still matter?
Yes.
So it was quite the juxtaposition of points of view. You and I are up on front in a panel. Two other people are there. And I heard you speak. I'd only ever read what you wrote. And I heard you speak. It was more articulate and more barbed than anything I'd ever read that you had written. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm glad we're on the same side because if you had spoke to me, I'd feel like a complete idiot. I would feel not worthy of life. And then I thought, you are so potent. Is this turning people off because they reject it? Because you are not investing in how they think. Everybody has little receptors for receiving information. And if you're just going to say, I'm right, and I know I'm right, and you're all just wrong and you're idiots, maybe that's not as effective as you can be. So I challenged you to be a little more sensitive to people who are just trying to explore the world and that you could be more effective than you are. Do you remember your reply to me?
I said, I gratefully accept the rebuke.
Yes. By the way, in that moment, there was like 5 seconds of silence because I'm just some young whippersnapper and you're like story famous guy on stage. Nobody made a sound.
They laughed.
No. Just in that moment of silence, it's, how is he going to react? It was one of these, what's he going to say? In that moment, it was total silence. And then you broke the silence with,
I gratefully accept the rebuke.
yes. And then people were calmed after that. Yes, and you gave a worse example. What was it? Do you remember? The editor.
The editor of New Scientist, who was asked, what is your policy at New Scientist magazine? And he said, our policy at New Scientist magazine is, science is interesting. If you don't agree, you can fuck off.
Tyson shifts the conversation to Dawkins' most controversial work, The God Delusion. He brings up the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and Dennett. Tyson challenges Dawkins here on his methods. He recounts a story where he told Dawkins that his sharp, barbed style might be turning people off. Tyson prefers the educator approach, gentle guidance. Dawkins prefers the sledgehammer approach, wake people up. This is a crucial debate within the atheist community. The Tyson approach, here is the science. If you want to keep your religion, fine. Just don't let it mess with the facts. This is diplomatic. It keeps the door open. The Dawkins approach, this belief is silly, dangerous, and false. Grow up. This is confrontational. Both are necessary. Tyson admits that after he rebuked Dawkins, Dawkins accepted it gracefully. But Tyson also notes that The God Delusion was a massive bestseller. It turns out many people needed the sledgehammer. They needed someone to say, you are not crazy for thinking religion is nonsense. You are not alone.
The Genetic Book of the Dead.
Yes.
A publisher actually let you use that title.
Why wouldn't they?
Because it's like, what? The Book of the Dead?
That worries me.
Well, I don't know.
I think it's rather an uplifting title.
The Genetic Book of the Dead?
Yes. It doesn't mean human dead.
Does this have a subtitle? What's the subtitle?
Yes, it does have a subtitle, A Darwinian Reverie.
So tell me about this book. I haven't read it yet.
If you look at a highly camouflaged animal, a desert lizard, is one that I use. It's got pebbles and sand all over its back. It's just a dummy painting of a desert on its back, okay? So that is a description of the world in which its ancestors lived. You can read that animal as a book describing the desert world in which its ancestors lived. Now that's an easy example because it's got it painted on its back. But it must be true right the way through every bit of every cell of the animal, every molecule of the animal has got the same description written.
And some of it is baggage. Baggage as in burdensome rather than...
Yes, but...
We have an appendix that can burst.
That's true.
You have a pinky toe. When was the last time you made good use of that?
Oh, you'd be surprised. The point is that natural selection is very, very fussy, is very, very intricate in its choice, far more than we even know about. We are poor judges of what's important for survival. When you think that the genes that survive, going back to the selfish gene, the genes that survive have to survive through lots and lots of different individuals and through a huge amount of geological time. And so any statistical estimate that you and I make about the likelihood that your pinky will be of any use to you is a statistical mistake. Natural selection is a much better statistician than we are.
So I'd need to think harder about my pinky toe.
Well, natural selection has millions of years in which to choose between successful toes and unsuccessful toes. J.B.S. Haldane did a calculation. J.B.S. Haldane, the great geneticist, did a calculation. He imagined a feature like a toe, something that seems trivial to you. And he said, let's allow that it's so trivial that for every 1,000 individuals who have it and survive, 999 die. This feature, the toe, whatever it is being repeated thousands of times in lots of different individuals and through lots of different millions of years. And it's got to survive through all those times. I'm explaining this very badly. The main point is that we are very bad estimators of what's important. in natural selection is a much better estimator of that.
Okay, how about male pattern baldness?
Well,
you got that one?
Well, that's a variable. I mean, some people have it and some people don't. You might take another example, maybe fingerprints. Why do we have fingerprints? Well, the fact that they're different doesn't matter, but are they important for clinging onto the trees when we were, had our boreal ancestors, that kind of thing?
Oh, I see. So even if they're not useful now, they were useful to get us to where we are now.
Hence the genetic book of the dead. I mean, we're talking about the past.
Damn, you're right. There it is. The genetic book of the dead.
Yes.
Enabling us to get to where we are at all.
Yes. We are a description of the worlds in which our dead ancestors survived until they died. Survived long enough to reproduce.
Because if we didn't survive, we'd be extinct, and we would.
Dawkins introduces the concept of his new book, The Genetic Book of the Dead. This is perhaps the most beautiful idea in the entire video. He argues that an animal's body is a description of the past. A lizard with camouflage that looks like sand is a book that describes the desert of its ancestors. A dolphin's body is a book that describes the hydrodynamics of the ocean.
Tyson adds, we have an appendix that can burst. We have a pinky toe. Dawkins explains that even these useless parts are descriptions of a past where they were useful. They are historical artifacts buried in our flesh. This completely inverts the creationist view. A creationist looks at a body and sees a design for the present. An evolutionist looks at a body and sees a map of the past. We are walking history books. Every gene in your body is there because it helped one of your ancestors survive a specific challenge, a plague, a famine, a predator. We're not made in the image of God. We're made in the image of our survivors. We are the legacy of the winners. That, to me, provides a sense of connection to history that no scripture can match.
Hope for civilization as it's currently manifested in the world?
I think we have to have hope to live our lives at all. It doesn't mean that at an intellectual level I necessarily have but I live my life as though I have hope, yes.
I've become, cynical is not the right word. I've become a practical cynic. There are people who think this way or feel that way or behave this other way. And I've stopped trying to change them. What I try to do is offer a way of looking at the world that maybe they'll take, maybe they won't. Maybe as an educator, it's my job to make this as tasty as possible so that, hey, that's a good idea. I never thought about it that way. But otherwise, I just gave a presentation to a Christian school, K through 12. I talked about optics. And at the end, it was open Q&A, and they were 11th graders, and they started grilling me on science versus the Bible. And I said, I'm not here to stop you from being religious at all. Okay, we live in a country that protects your freedom to be religious, and you're in a private school. So the government is not going to come after you and say you have to get this out of the public coffers. I made that clear, but I didn't have the urge to try to convert them. And I get the sense that you've had this urge your entire life to convert people with no less zeal than a religious person, a religious evangelical religious person would have trying to convert people who are not that. Did I tell you? I didn't tell you this. We have a Big Bang Theater here.
Yes.
And back when we first opened here at the Hayden Planetarium, there's a separate theater space where we just talk about the Big Bang. Someone came out of the Big Bang, saw me and says, how come you didn't mention God in there? And then I realized, okay, what am I going to do? I say, how about this? Why don't you go to our Hall of Human Evolution and then come back here? And when I tell them to do that, they never come back because that's way more offensive to them. having monkeys and humans hold hands in the dioramas than anything we could ever say in the Big Bang here.
I thought they'd rather like the Big Bang. I mean, the Big Bang sounds pretty much like Genesis.
It's a creation event. Yeah. Maybe that's why they thought we should have mentioned God and didn't. But I don't even have the conversation. I just send them over to your part of the museum.
Yes. But I think you're being too pusillanimous. You shouldn't duck the question.
Well, I don't duck it so much as sometimes I don't have the energy.
Oh, that's different. I get that too.
You feel that?
I understand that. But in my field, that really is an absolute opposition. It's not something you
complete. Although the Catholic Church, they've met you in the middle.
Yeah, they have.
They said, we have this branch of primates, and then God breathed the soul into them, and they're humans, allowing evolution all up to that point.
Yeah.
That's you got to give them some. You got to
not a step.
But the world is not that binary. It's not that binary. I don't see it that way. There are religious people who are where Jesus is their savior, but they're perfectly fine with a 4.5 billion year old Earth.
Yes, they are.
Okay, they're not at the extreme.
They don't see the contradiction, but yes.
So maybe the plurality of the world is a feature rather than a bug of the programming of what it is to be human.
But the truth is so much more grand and so much more elegant and so much more poetic and so much more beautiful. Why drag Jesus in?
And I would still claim you could get more of that across if people didn't feel stupid talking to you.
Yeah, that's true.
So you're a professor at Oxford? Are you retired? Yeah. You retired. Okay.
The video winds down with a question about hope. Dawkins admits to being a practical cynic. He doesn't necessarily expect people to change, but he lives as if there is hope. Tyson shares a story about a Christian school where he refused to debate theology and instead just taught the science. He mentions that the Catholic Church has largely accepted evolution, with the caveat that God inserts the soul. Tyson argues that the world is not binary. It's not just atheists versus fundamentalists. There's a messy middle. And while Dawkins finds the messy middle intellectually dishonest, how can you believe in evolution and a magical soul? Tyson finds it pragmatically useful. However, Tyson ends with a powerful sentiment. The truth is so much more grand and so much more elegant. Why drag Jesus into it? This is the mic drop moment. Even if you can reconcile God and science by doing mental gymnastics, why bother? The science stands on its own. The universe doesn't need a manager. Gravity doesn't need a purity test. DNA doesn't need a blesser.
Yes.
People we would otherwise think should be smart.
Yes.
Don't get it. Well, Richard, it's been a delight to,
as always, thank you so much.
Have you here. Let me just end this with some brief reflections. Those among us who are educated on a level where you can't just hold it in, you have to sort of share the knowledge, wisdom, insights one gleans from having committed your life to studying a subject and its related components. And Richard Dawkins is an example of that. Carl Sagan used to say, when you're in love, you want to tell the world. And were there 24 books on this list that I just read? This is Professor Dawkins can't contain his love, and he's got to share it for all those who seek a deeper understanding of life, not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them, and the lives of all that came before us, and the lives of all those yet to be born. But in there are messages of protecting our civilization, because without it, there will be no future lives to be born. And then what of our branch in the tree of life? We can't let the roaches and the rats take over after us. Help us. That is a cosmic perspective. Neil deGrasse Tyson here, your personal astrophysicist. As always, I bid you to keep looking up.
Tyson closes by praising Richard Dawkins' inability to contain his love for the truth, and this is the ultimate takeaway for us. Religion often claims it has a monopoly on love, on purpose, and on zeal. But look at Richard Dawkins. Look at Neil deGrasse Tyson. These are men driven by a burning passion for reality. They are evangelists for the physical world. The point of this podcast wasn't just to debunk God, it was to offer something better. Instead of a static creation, we have the dynamic drama of evolution. Instead of a mysterious soul, we have the digital immortality of DNA. Instead of a God of the gaps, we have the poetry of reality. We don't need to fear the darkened vessel of our biology. We should celebrate it. We are the universe waking up, looking at itself, and finally, after billions of years, beginning to understand the script that wrote us. Keep looking up and keep asking questions. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and turn your notification for more video like this.